I'm gonna tweet out the link, and then
Okay.
And then we'll get the others. I'm putting it in the group chat that we're all on, and if we all just send out tweets now.
Okay, where's the chat?
On with Simon. What's your handle, Luke? Oh,
Luke's got a very, very strange handle, actually.
Lukey, RADA.
Luke.
What?
Lukey.
Is that Twitter?
Oh, my Twitter. No,
yeah.
It's PRO.
Oh, that's right.
PENG 37, I think.
God, you make it impossible.
Well, exactly.
It's because all my accounts get shut and I have to keep making names up.
Okay. Say your Twitter account again one more time. No.
Do you want my Twitter or my Google? Twitter. PROPENG 37. I'll write it in the chat.
Got it. I've got it. Okay. There we go. So you guys are live. I'm not going to say very much. In fact, I'm going to have to probably. Okay,
great. All right, Luke. Well, we seem to be live. And can you tweet it out? Can you do the tweeting, Brian? And then.
Well, I've tweeted it, and if you just retweet me.
Okay.
You've only got 3 viewers. I wish we could put it out on your.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of. There was about 70 people there, which is kind of good, really.
I'll retweet it as well. I'll try.
Yeah, I've just seen it now.
Maybe can we put it? Maybe you can copy and paste the link. Have you got the link, Simon?
The link is you sent me the link in the email.
I sent it in the YouTube in a Twitter DM.
Yeah, in a Twitter DM. Yeah.
Okay, I've just tweeted it out as well.
Okay. Well, shall we start?
You might as well start, you two.
Yeah, you can do. I'm not sure how the YouTube thing works. Let's have a look. Just gonna open it up on YouTube as well, so I can see the chat and whatnot. Yeah, if you want to start, Simon.
Okay. Well, all right, Luke. Well, things have got a little less confrontational as we've been fucking about for so long.
Yes.
But fundamentally, we have a difference of opinion, and I think there's 2 places we can start really, and in the message that I sent to you, and we have various conflicts that are based around a misunderstanding, I think, or in my opinion, deliberate misunderstandings. But I'm sure you'll say they're not deliberate. That this is how they've appeared to me. But I tweeted out. Yes, I think internet political debate has got more interesting as a result of Sargon of Akkad's liberalist position. I find myself somewhere between the liberalists and the alt-right. And basically you said to me 2 things in a rather long response. And there were 2 things that I could have responded to and one was, what liberal principles do you disagree with? And the second one, you seem to have become, and I'm paraphrasing you, part and parcel of the alt-right. The bit that annoyed me most was you seem to have become part and parcel of the alt-right. So that was the part of your message that I addressed. So basically, we can start wherever you like. Those are the 2 parts of your message to me. Yeah. So where do you want to go with that, really?
I'm just I took all screenshots for the sake of the video regarding the little Facebook exchange we had initially, and where I asked the question. I'm just trying to find it so I can say exactly what I said or asked. But yeah, I think. Well,
I mean, it was a
I
twofold
did a
question.
yeah, I did a response, kind of reading through your piece, and I kind of reflected and gave my interpretation on bits of it. But yeah, I got through it without feeling that my initial question regarding principles was really answered. So
Well, okay. Do you want
I
me
think,
to? Do you want me to say what the principles are? And I think the classical liberal principles, at no point in my article do. It might be it's a point of interpretation, but they're very broad. And furthermore, you link to the liberalist principles. You were kind of criticizing me, asking me. I consider disingenuously why I was talking about liberalism. The reason why I was talking about the liberalists is because my initial comment was that Sargon has set up the liberalists.
yeah,
And so that this was my starting parry. The liberalists obviously have classical liberal views a la Sargon, which I consider to be a bit left. Well, Sargon admits that he's a lefty. He's a bit of a cuck in many respects, in certain aspects. So the reason why I talked about liberalists versus the alt-right was because that's where the conflict in internet is. If you're asking me, do I have any fundamental disagreements with classical liberal principles, and if you want to talk about what classical liberal principles are, I would say that they are freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom from violence, the right to own property, and equality under the law. That's the liberalist principles page. But if classical liberals principles as defined by Locke and others following him, that will do for me. And I don't think anything that I said in that article contradicts those principles.
right. I think we're slightly getting conflated between, which is what I said a few times in the video, the principles of liberalism as like their separate standalone thing, and sort of personalities that advocate for liberalism, which they've called themselves under the liberalist label.
But
I think,
sorry, but I would say that the fundamental principles are flexible enough to allow lots of interpretations. They're a very broad thing. You can go from libertarian to almost social democrat whilst adhering to these principles. They're fundamental principles, so there's a lot of flexibility in them.
yeah.
So consequently, the fact that Sargon is proposing this, and the reason why I think it's important to talk about Sargon and his group is because this is where I'm positioning myself. I'm positioning myself between them. So my original post was making an express reference to what I understand to be what were formerly called the skeptics, having followed the Kraut controversy, and what I understand to be the alt-right, a la Millennial Woes and Richard Spencer. Now, within the alt-right, and you keep there are lesser personalities, but I think the ideologues of the alt-right are Millennial Woes and Richard Spencer. And as I pointed out, there are things that I disagree with them on, which would be the Jewish question. I don't think there's a Jewish conspiracy. There might be a lot of Jews involved in things that free-thinking people might like, but there are a lot of Jews that oppose that.
Yeah.
So it's not, you can't make a generalization based around race. It's nothing to do with that. It's something else. I oppose the idea of the ethno-state, and I also oppose the idea of miscegenation in principle, despite the fact that I don't want the whole world to be coffee colored. I think diversity depends on, inevitably, has to be founded in racial differences, and the fact that you and I are different, and the average of our races, and I know that you're mixed race, but or the averages between the different races are different. That's diversity. That's good. The fact that each of those different races have different strengths and qualities is fine. I don't see where the problem lies in this. And given the fact that I've lived here in Spain for 30 years and have got, well, I've got a stepdaughter and a daughter, but you know, the intermingling of different genetic data, for example, I have no essential problem with. My first wife wasn't black, but she was half Andalusian, a bit Basque, and a bit Catalan. She definitely wasn't pure pink Anglo-Saxon. So I fundamentally have no problem with that.
Okay.
So I don't think I'm on the same page as the alt-right, whilst accepting that, and yeah, I'm going on a bit because I've got a lot to say. I don't know where to define myself. Pretty much whatever you say. Yes, I've become a white advocate, for want of a better word, and I'd put that as a civic nationalist with a strong recognition of ethnicity, or an ethno-nationalist with a realistic understanding that civic nationalism is the reality we need to deal with. So I'm not talking about gassing anybody. I'm not talking about any kind of totalitarianism or collectivism. What I'm interested in doing is recognizing identities, and I have an identity, and I'm prepared to stand up and be proud about it.
Okay. I think we're getting a little bit lost in the weeds. I was more explicitly focused on principles. I'll just repeat my initial question. I'll just read it out as I wrote it on Facebook. So you sent out your thing on Facebook regarding the liberalist criticisms video by Sargon, and I responded with, what principles of liberalism are you not in favor of, Simon? Question mark, genuinely interested. And then I wrote, the reason the alt-right is full of shit is because its ideas are piss poor and their principles are even worse. And then I've listed some of their principles. So 1, racial identitarianism / collectivism.
Which I reject.
2, race-based discrimination / segregation. 3, anti-meritocracy. 4, anti-freedom. I'll just read it off and then you can respond. 3, anti-meritocracy. 4, anti-freedom, and I've put in brackets free speech and freedom of association. So an example of freedom of association is the freedom to get with a black or Asian or whatever person, and 5, authoritarian. And the last sentence, I said, you seem to have been swept up in the hype and noise surrounding this movement. I'd argue that you share 0 alt-right principles, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, okay, let me respond directly to that.
So we can go through each of the principles if you like.
But I reject all of them. I don't. Okay. And I think in the course of the article that I wrote, I don't embrace. I take time out, and the reason why I think your response to me is disingenuous, and some of the flack that I've received is, yes, I'm trying to put forward proposals, like the racial differences are real. So realism is a fact of things. it's deeper than just IQ, and IQ is a very trivial interpretation of it. So my argument is that race realism has to be recognized and has to be put on the table. I think very, very clearly in the course of the article that I write, I reject the alt-right's solutions to the scientific facts. I don't accept any of these principles, and I think all the proposals that I make are consistent with a possible interpretation of the liberal principles that I stated earlier. And I really don't see what the problem is. But I think ethnicity is something that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, I don't really disagree with that. And there were large parts of your piece that I agreed with. Probably on aggregate, I agreed with more of it than I disagreed with. I'm just going to read out a section from it, though, that I think kind of contradicts that you reject all of those principles. So this is from your piece. I also think policies should be introduced to encourage people of non-European origin to move back to the countries their parents or grandparents originally came from. These policies could include financial incentives, but a return to free market policies of hiring and firing would also make the situation a little less propitious for groups who are currently the beneficiaries of affirmative action. Do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, I don't think it's. I'm just finding it here.
I'll just tell you the way I interpreted it, if that's okay. I mean, and then you can respond.
Again, my view of your interpretation of it is that yes, there are large parts of it that you admit you agree with, but then the parts that you don't agree with, you paint as negatively as you possibly can. Okay, the reality of the racial changes, we both agree that in an ideal world, between 85 and 90% of the population needs to remain indigenous, for want of a better word. Now that means, yeah, if you're traditionally English, you know, Alfred the Great, Shakespeare, Henry VIII, and Churchill were all pretty damn white. So for more or less 1,000 years, there's been, yes, there were the Huguenots, and there were, but there hasn't been a massive, and yeah, the word is invasion. Looking at it from afar, looking at how Britain has changed in my lifetime. Now, perhaps the mistake I make in the wording is I say non-European rather than just foreign. Foreign probably would be more. Yeah, I mean, Poles taking jobs from plumbers in Sheffield is just as annoying as anything else. As the amount of immigration has become too great. It's made the country unsustainable. It atomizes the identity. The more atomization that happens, the more difficult it is for newcomers to have something to integrate into. So the percentage of immigrants in general needs to be maximum 15%. I think ideally 10%. And one of the points that I make is that would make a society into which it's much easier to integrate. Once it gets higher than that, everything gets more atomized. Now, the big problem is, obviously, you have to slow the tide, stop the tide, and then turn back the tide of immigration. I would suggest you tended to agree with me on the idea that you suggested that immigration should be stopped for 5 years. I'd say, I mean, in the United States, they basically stopped immigration virtually. You never stop it completely, but mass immigration should be stopped for a period much longer than that in order to allow people that are in the United Kingdom or in other European countries to assimilate, integrate, and become part of the texture of the country to a much deeper level. And this is not intended to be insulting, but I mean, I've lived in Catalonia for 30 years, and I understand, and I'm really integrated in the place. I speak Catalan to a level that nobody can tell that I'm not Catalan. I'm extremely integrated, but I'm not Catalan, and I don't kid myself to believing that I'm from here. And these processes take at least a generation. They take time, so a great deal of time is necessary. So immigration needs to be stopped. And we'll get on, I'm sure we'll get on to the white genocide issue, which we also disagree on. But the demographics are working against the indigenous population. So even if you stop immigration, that ideal of 85 to 90%, and for want of a better word, white, is going to be turned around simply by demographics. The second part of that paragraph is actually is about equality before the law, because what we're doing is suffering such a great deal of affirmative action that it actually makes it easier. And I don't think this is the case with so much with the Caribbean, the West Indian population, but inevitably in a piece like that wasn't dealing specifically with Islam, we're talking with the massive increase in the Muslim demographic. But looking at the statistics, and I don't have them at hand, almost every demographic apart from white British is increasing. White British is decreasing. So in order to make the ideal that we both agree on practical, then somehow, and I'm not talking about, and the important thing is I'm not talking about obliging, forcing, I'm talking about encouraging people to leave the country, not necessarily based on color.
Okay. Can I just add something there? So part of our exchanges, if you like, today were kind of, I think that you felt that I was in some ways misrepresenting what you wrote. So I'll just tell you my interpretation of especially that first sentence from the paragraph I read back. You've since clarified just a minute ago that you think instead of people of non-European origin, that perhaps you meant foreigners in general.
Yeah, I think
is that correct?
Well, I think I used non-European origin because the topic was race. I would broadly say that immigration in general is a bad idea. I actually think, and I know Brian is hosting us, but I think it's a bad idea to have Ashkenazi Jews and Orientals coming as well, because they have higher IQs on average. They tend to occupy elite positions. Yeah, I would like, and I'm reminding you that I'm actually not living there. I'm looking at this from the outside.
Yes.
I actually don't. There's an element of my views on this. This hasn't happened where I live yet, but I'm looking back on the last 50 years of my life. I said to somebody who has recognized me from YouTube on the street today, a Catalan, and I was saying, look, I'm a visitor from the future. And what I don't want to happen is now I see what's happened to the UK. I don't want this to happen to Catalonia because I don't think it's positive.
Sure.
And the reason why I don't think I'm betraying any liberal principles is there's no obligation that I think that the reason why I differ from the alt-right is, yes, they're authoritarian in their way of imposing these their measures on the existing population. My view is I'm not massively happy about what happened, and I've only come to this conclusion kind of 50 years on. It's only once I've got to the end. But looking back on what's happened, if you'd asked me in 1975, I would have been fine with immigration. But looking back on the result of it today, I think it was a bad idea to start with, and it was badly planned to start with. But as it's happened, I don't think you can be authoritarian and fascistic about imposing racial mandates on people. What you have to do is live with it and set policies that will encourage people to do to get to this ideal of between 85 and 90% indigenous or traditionally British, in order to maintain the character of the country and consciously start to reestablish a culture that is proudly English. That newcomers, and I don't consider yourself to be a newcomer or your father to be a newcomer, but that newcomers have the chance of integrating into, because the more atomized and vague it becomes, the less possible that is. That's basically my view. But you don't you have to live with the results of the history. I would say those were a mistake.
Yeah, I just want to kind of summarize like my thinking for the interpretation, really. So because I read your first sentence from that paragraph as encourage people of non-European origin to move back to countries, etc. I obviously interpreted that as basically non-white people, and I then responded according to that interpretation. But you've since stated that you kind of meant to say foreigners in general. So I just don't want you to think that I was deliberately misrepresenting what you said or arguing in bad faith.
Mm.
So
I mean, I think different countries, and again, the reason why I almost all my nationalist ideas, bizarrely, that I'm now applying to the UK have come from Catalonia. Catalonia now has a population of about 7.5 million. In the 60s and 70s, the reason why Catalonia will never become independent, and if my wife hears me say this to you, she'll kick me out on my ear tomorrow. But the reason why it won't become independent is because Franco imported 2.5 million Castilian speakers into Catalonia in the 1960s and 1970s in order to dilute Catalan identity. So it's not a question of color, it's a question of immigration. You seem to be I think there's a globalist, for want of a better word. There's an international capitalist. There's a lefty elite. I don't know who they are, but this open borders policy, this deliberate shipping in of peoples, is part of this odd capitalist leftist alliance, which they both serve the same purpose. The multinationals get cheaper workers, the leftists get welfare dependent voters to a certain extent. That doesn't mean that the individuals who are shipped in, and this is what has happened in Catalonia, they're not individually to blame, but this was a policy. And I watched this happening around Europe, and it's clearly a policy. And and also living here in Spain, yes, yeah. For somebody like yourself, the waves of sub-Saharan Africans that are coming on boats, I daily, I'm watching this happen. And Brian and I, in our conversation this week, it's an invasion. And the more sub-Saharan Africans who are less prepared, and I can't remember whether I've said this in this conversation yet, but your father's generation seemed to be a better class of black person, basically, because they were your father, or perhaps your grandfather's generation, I don't know, came and they were chosen by the bus companies. They came over with a job, with a house, with a desire to integrate. That's the people that I met when I was at junior school. I don't think that's happening now. People are coming over in boats, in waves, and the more random this kind of immigration is, the more racial questions get, the more the question of color becomes present. Somebody like yourself, who is obviously integrated. I'm not talking about individual. I'm talking about averages. The more difficult that's going to make life for people that are integrated and settled.
Sure.
Can I jump in? I've been watching most of this. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
I've done all sorts of.
Yeah. When it gets to the alt-right, the bit that I have a problem with all stems from their sort of slavish view of the consequences of the bell curve distribution of different intelligences. And I haven't researched this to the nth degree that I would have to really fully understand it. Well, not to fully understand it, but to say, I think every society has got a vast range of IQs. Naturally, that's just what it is. It's a bell curve. It's fat in the middle and it tails off. And I think societies don't need vast hordes of hyper intelligent people. I think if we were all autistic on the autistic scale and unable to communicate with humans, but fantastic at doing computer programming, if everybody was like that, it would be a horrific world. And the bit that the alt-right seems to, they seem to obsess on the fact that if you bring in sub-Saharan Africa and Arab migrations and waves and waves and waves, they're critically obsessed with averages. Okay, they want the average of their society to be something, and that bit bugs me, because when we look at the societies that we've built in the West, we need people everywhere doing everything. And funnily enough, I always come back to Israel because it's what I know best. But when the alt-right has this view that Ashkenazi Jews are all very hyper intelligent, well, they're not. It's obviously a scale. And when you get to Israel and you regard Israel, what you see is we've got a big range, because we've got Ashkenazi Jews and we've got Mizrahi Jews who were in the Spanish bits and the Arabians. We've got a mix. Plus, we've got all the Arabs, upwards of 2 million, 20% of our population are Arabs. So we've got this huge mix, and we've got people at every level of strata of society. We've got doctors and we've got street sweepers, and the street sweepers are often Jews, and the taxi drivers are Jewish, and the bus drivers are Jewish. And this is not something you think of in the rest of the world, but we've got the diversity of range of different types of people, but we have a value system. And this is what Western Europe used to have. It used to have a value system. It used to have a Christian-based, men and women get married, have children, families, things that we are now tearing apart. And it is not, it's not even really Islam that's tearing those things apart. It's the left within, you know, this cultural Marxism and the left. And the bigger problem, to my mind, is the importing of different value systems. I think
I've been speaking too much. Do you want to address that, Luke? I've got something very specific to say.
Yeah. I want to specifically address the IQ point that Brian raised, because it's quite ironic, actually, but the alt-right don't seem to understand what an average is or how averages work. So typically they'll frame it in terms of IQ ranking. So you've got blacks typically have the lowest, sub-Saharan Africans, if you want to class it by region. On average, yes, I'm speaking in averages. Then I think it's Hispanics. Then I think it's whites. Then I think Asians, and then Ashkenazi Jews at the top.
Yeah.
And then they have this average IQ hierarchy that they claim to base their thinking on. So they always emphasize how important, apparently, that IQ is in their white Mecca, their ethno state. They want a homogenous society, one, and
they
want
terrible things about Prince. What's her name? The woman that the prince is going to marry, because, you know, what are they doing?
Meghan
Markle. Mixing his tremendous genetic inheritance, because, I mean, you know, the royal family are well known to be.
Yeah. Well, they have this IQ hierarchy, and they claim to want highly homogeneous society, and their second main claim, as far as I can tell, is that they want a higher average IQ society. So if really they did care about IQ, then they would give a preference to higher IQ people. It seems to me their core preference and their core basis of judgment is racial. It's nothing to do with IQ, really.
No, it's not.
For example, if they were to be given a choice between, say, Thomas Sowell, Gadsad, Steven Pinker, Sam Harris, whoever you want to name, multiple high IQ people, you know, and you'd offer them, would you like to have these people in your ethno state, or these 10 white people of an IQ of, say, 80 or 85, which I think the average is? They'd choose the lower IQ people every time. So to me, the IQ thing, it's just a cover.
No, it is ethnic. And it's not about IQ. It is about...
I wish they'd be honest about that, though.
Well, okay, I'm being honest.
No, I know you are, but as I said, I don't think you are alt-right.
Well, I'm not.
He's not, that's for sure.
But I'm it's quite simply, I'm not afraid of saying what I think. I don't come out and talk shit. And one of the things, I wrote a second article today, and I write in order to try and sort out in my own head what I think until I've written it down. And so when you judge me on what I write, to a certain extent, the reason why I write things down is I'm sorting out my own opinions in the process of writing it down. This doesn't go to mass. This isn't written in stone. But it is ethnic, and basically I got interested in all this as a result of the Kraut tea controversy, and I got in relatively towards the end, and basically Ryan Falk and Jean-Francois Gariepi, the two scientists, the two race realists, scientists in that group, convinced me enough beyond Stefan Molyneux. I'd watched the Stefan Molyneux interviews, and it all seemed interesting. But it was only once that controversy kicked off that I really began thinking, whoa, this has really massive implications for how society is created. And so I've watched lots of speeches. I watched all the interviews, and something I really recommend you to watch is an audio book. But I'm on internet working on stuff because I've got a reasonably successful Barcelona tourism site, and I'm often doing maintenance stuff and bits and bobs. So I'm listening to information at the same time, and it's an audio book called Race, Evolution and Behavior by Philippe something, but it's called Race, Evolution and Behavior. And I can, and basically he gets to 60 factors of difference on each ethnicity. And there are things like IQ. IQ is a very broad thing, because IQ is one level. But actually, if you stop and think about IQ, a white European who's got an IQ of 70 is obviously mentally retarded, but sub-Saharan Africans aren't. So what IQ is measuring is to a certain extent the ability to function in Western European societies. So it's a great predictor of your academic success, your work success, your life success in advanced societies. So I think there definitely is an environmental factor there. But things like crime rate, things like testosterone levels, explosivity, there's character. The differences between the genetic differences between the races are more profound than just IQ. And so consequently, and if I'm not conversant enough with all the information to just be able to come out and give you quotations, but I've been through enough of it to have come to the conclusion that it's not about IQ. This is the reason why it has to be about 90% indigenous, because and this is the quotation I make at some point, if you import the third world, you can become the third world. You might find that offensive or not, but the essential character will change once the demographic becomes majority non-white European. And it's not a question of superiority. You look at Britain First videos and you think some of the white people on Britain First videos, you really think you people are the master race? You must be fucking joking, mate. We're not, but white.
I've got to tell you that when I watch Jews arguing on the left, I feel very firmly that way as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not but it's a question of we are what we are. Yeah, and I suppose the thing that I've become aware of, and I think it's a valid thing to put on the table, and it's something that black people do, this whole brother business, this whole, and in my conversations with Brian, we've talked a lot about the guiding principles of what it is to be a Jew. Now, without becoming a collectivist, I think it's a good idea to have people just being proud to be white, people just being proud to be white and English, without necessarily implying anything bad about anybody else. And to be perfectly honest, given my age, I'm of an age where saying that wasn't at all unreasonable. I was proud to be white and English whilst playing in reggae bands, and it's only the last 10 or 15 years of this political correctness where we all got to be diverse, and all of a sudden saying this kind of thing, yeah, I'm Anglo-Saxon, I'm proud of it, so fuck off. And I've kind of lived life with all different people, and the reason why I've been successful here in Catalonia is I've lost none of this cantankerousness that I've always had, because I know who I am and I'm happy at who I am. And it seems to me that this is something that white people have had drummed out of them by society, and I regret that. And I'm not suggesting some kind of collectivist hellhole, but I am suggesting white pride in the same way as black pride, in the same way as people ought to be happy to be who they are. You look at yourself in the mirror, I look like this, and that's fucking great, mate. That's basically my view of things.
Right. I'm gonna, throughout this, I'm gonna kind of more direct it to the alt-right and kind of how they perceive things and the core basis behind their principles, because that's what I'm more focused on, really.
Okay,
as far as we can get more into the details and the weeds about the benefits, the pros and cons of immigration policy and having certain percentage of X or Y ethnicity. But I think the racial component and the values component, what I think is that the alt-right, they kind of view whiteness as an ideology.
I agree with you, which is why I'm not outright.
Yeah, so the reason he got mocked a lot for it, but when Sargon was asking, I think he was asking Richard Spencer a few times in that debate, you know, define whiteness, what does whiteness mean? I think that's what he was getting at, because they seem to view whiteness as an ideology. So obviously that entails certain principles or certain behaviors or certain traits, if you like. So I think that's what he was getting at. And
can I tell you something about my views on alt-right identity and their identity crisis? So what I diagnose from outside looking at them is a crisis of identity. So they've looked around and they've seen that the world is full of identity politics, and the left is hard on identity politics. Everybody comes up with and then associates with an identity. And if they don't like the identity that they're born with, they transition to being Elizabeth Warren choosing to be Cherokee because it helps her, or you know, the transracial woman who decided that she was black and beaded her hair and all that stuff. Yeah. And America's a very strange place, because they've actually got a whole bunch of local identities. State identities are very strong. If you ever cross the border from Arkansas into Texas, it's like an artificial vertical line drawn on a map, but the language changes, the total accent change on a line drawn a few hundred years ago. It's very, very strange. But yet that's not a good enough, that's not the identities that they want. And so they've constructed, I think they've constructed a white European identity over and above the mishmash that is America. And that is the core of the problem with the alt-right, is that they've come up with a fake identity. Now, I think that there are some identities that are really real, that have got hundreds of years of history. Like Boer farmers in South Africa actually have a very strong, different identity to Dutch people. Their language has changed, their whole way of living has changed, their food has changed, they've got an identity. Catalonia seems to have an identity. Bits of Germany, bits of England, the Welsh, the Scottish, the English are distinct, proper identities. Now, they're not exclusive identities. I think you can do a pretty good job of being English. I think Sikh people can arrive in England, and after not even a generation, they can learn what it is, what Englishness is. And English used to be it's an exclusive identity. Simon seems to have done so in Barcelona. He's got, he's still got his pride of England, but he knows what it is to be Catalonian now. So the alt-right has fixated, by fixating on a skin color and calling them, even just by saying white above all, you paint yourself into a box, which is you then can't adopt. I will never be white in my head. I'll never project whiteness. Even if I went to America and I could pass for white, I don't want to be, because I have another identity, which is Jew, which is stronger than white for me. But that's this is what the alt-right struggles with, in my view, in projecting, and it's why it's a non-inclusive thing, and it can't. I don't think it can grow so easily, because you can't say, come to us, you can become alt-right. They won't accept black people very easily. I mean, there'll be some bizarre elements of it that will sprout off, but then they'll always have this fight of, are we trying to be ethnically pure? And that's what I heard in that big long Sargon versus Spencer thing, was this constant back to, are you going to get back to genetic testing? As soon as you do that, I think you're lost. But it is a mix.
That's the logical conclusion of their principles and their ideology. It's often said, but it is true, they are the right-leaning equivalent of SJWs, because they are racial identitarian collectivists. So when that is the basis for your ideology, and once you drill down into it and define who is white, and then you start drawing up classifications. So take Tara McCarthy, for example. Tara McCarthy has Indian heritage, and I also just found out, hilariously, that she's actually part Jewish. I think she calls herself a fourth-generation Holocaust survivor or something stupid like that.
I haven't gone into enough detail on her background. I don't like really discussing specific. I don't want to trash people.
I'm not trashing her.
I'll tell you, the
issue is a point of reference.
The West really is in deep, deep trouble. Really, it is in deep trouble because, look, I've been studying Islam and the Islamic invasion since just after 2001, far longer than most. I was writing and blogging. I had a podcast that I actually gave up in about 2009, which was long before most people had ever heard of the damn things. And we satirized Islam. I saw what was happening with Islam in the UK. That's why I left. It was one of the major parts of me taking my family away from the UK, which I liked. I mean, I grew up there. I came to be a person now. I went through 2 universities. British, I felt very British. I had a British passport, but in the end, I just didn't want to raise Jewish kids there because there's an alternative for me, and I felt more comfortable with Jews in Israel. But Europe is in dire trouble unless it stops bringing in hordes more Muslims, and it makes, my personal view is just like Simon said. I would right now be for encouraging, especially pious Muslims, encouraging them to leave, making the practice of Islam less easy in the West. I don't see an alternative, to be honest.
I mean, but it's not just Islam. The mass immigration is double pronged, and the mass immigration since the fall of Libya, since the fall of Gaddafi. There's mass immigration coming from sub-Saharan Africa, and and they're not necessarily. There's quite a lot of Muslims amongst them, but it's not necessarily a good idea. Well, it's certainly not a good idea. They're not equipped, and to a certain extent, and we go back to this 90% objective. Or I mean, nothing's written in stone, but Europe has to be majority. France has to be majority French. England has to be majority English.
Israel has to be majority Jewish.
Yeah,
I mean, I know
Austria has to, and one of you asked me, Luke, about the difference between the European identitarians. Yeah, I don't have any problem with being an identitarian, because it's about carving the identity for each, Austrians being Austrians, Germans being Germans. I think that necessarily involves a white majority, because the majority, the indigenous majority, they're the people that have been there for since medieval times, since post-Roman times, basically. And I repeat, the only way you can be tolerant, and you kind of, I mentioned in my article, I would like to go back somehow to the time of the 70s and 80s, when certainly in my own head, immigration didn't seem to be a problem. It's only post 90s when things have just got out of control. And yes, you said that you're a child of the 80s, and most of the kids at your school were black. Now, if there's one or two
Indians
or Indians,
yeah.
If there's one or two schools like that, that's okay. But apparently, there's now 80 schools in England with no white kids. Now, I can't see that that's a good thing. I can't, and that's not venting any hate against the people that are there, but it's not an ideal situation, because something has been lost. The more ghettoized things become, the less personality, the easier it is for, and this is particularly the case with Muslims, but Muslims who never really interact with anybody outside their part of town and never learn to speak English. That's not a good thing. And once those percentages fall below majority white, then you've got a problem, I think, because the country uses personality.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And you also mentioned earlier a really important, valid point regarding earlier generations of not mass, well, let's say large-scale migration. So like you refer to either my father or my grandfather's generation, like the Windrush generation. The difference between them and kind of what's happening now is, first of all, they were required and specifically invited to fill vacancies and job shortages. So they were necessary and required for the economy and to, rebuild post-war. And because they were of the Commonwealth as well, they had a fair few similarities and were more willing to integrate. Compare that to what you've got now. You've got generally African and Middle Eastern, the majority of it, people coming here, not invited, just coming because they've got word of basically the welfare state. So they're coming to get on the gravy train, but there's not that sense of affinity with Britain. Like, they're not Commonwealth countries. They aren't necessarily au fait with British culture or history. And they get here and they don't really care for anything but the lifestyle that this country affords them. And they don't have the work ethic and mindset that they're going to come here and integrate and work and contribute something to society. I'm obviously massively generalizing, but we've seen, as I say in my video, we're not getting the best people coming. It's often the worst people. So this is why the racial thing is important. I'd agree with you there, but I think it's also, you can't underestimate the values. If you get in people of different ethnicity, but they have the values, as long as you're doing that in reasonable number, I think that's the winning way, really. in terms of the alt-right, what I've said there, they view as completely sacrilege. They don't give a shit about values. That they want a white ethno state. And touching on values, they'd rather have white, far left, communist Antifa types here than, say, someone like Larry Elder or Thomas Sowell, like
Exactly.
Black American Republicans with high IQ,
Well, I'd rather
good work ethic, etc.
I mean, I had a mate at school, and this is why I go back to my childhood. I had a mate at school, and I never realised till much later. And I used to go around his house occasionally, and his dad was a pork pie hat wearing Jamaican. You know, we're talking about 1968, 1969.
Yeah.
And they had, and his mum was a big, pretty fat Jamaican mama.
Yes.
And they had a picture of the Queen on the wall. And when I went round there, they brought out their best. I mean, they treated me like royalty, really. And it was only that later that I realised. I went round and we played football together in a park, but I only realised later that the reason why they treated me so well was they were so pleased that their son Solomon had got a white English mate who was prepared to come round to his house. And they had an active desire. We're talking about a long time. This is the same year as Enoch Powell was making the Rivers of Blood speech. So these kind of integration issues were important, and they had an active desire to integrate. His parents were in work. They had a house. It's a whole different thing, and I imagine that this is more or less your dad's generation. And your dad's generation made their way. And the more of the lower class, lower IQ sub-Saharan Africans that come in, the more difficult they make life for people like you. And Brian is telling us that we need to be finishing on the hour, so we need to be wrapping up. So I mean, that's my view of things. I don't think it's about racial purity, but you need a certain kind of person, a person with a desire to integrate. And when the numbers are relatively small, it works. Once the ghettoization begins, I know you lived in Handsworth. Certainly when in the 70s, Handsworth was the famous, Handsworth Revolution by Steel
Pulse, yeah.
I mean, I saw Steel Pulse multiple times. It was a great time because all the reggae bands. The reason why I got into reggae was because all the reggae bands were supporting the punk bands. So you kind of, and I was playing in a punk band, so you kind of ended up exchanging chops with the other guitarist in the band. That's going off at a tangent, but that was a time when Handsworth was very much the Jamaican West Indian, just like Brixton was.
Well, and the East End of London was the Jewish part.
Yeah.
But I know one of my good friends who, from the counter Islam days, he's fled that part of town, gay man, fled East London, which used to be Jewish, because it's Tower Hamlets.
Come on,
now.
We got 4 minutes.
I'm not being. I don't want to be killer, but it is 11 o'clock at night here. I'm an hour ahead of you.
No, that's okay.
And I think we're reaching but I think you two have come a bit closer together. I think dry words on pages always cause and
we were
majority.
We were majority in agreement. I think, as I said before, as going on aggregate through the piece that Simon wrote, I'm in agreement with the majority of it. I wouldn't want to put a percentage on it, but the majority, I do agree with.
I objected to your. You see, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think that you emphasised, and there were lots of other that this Anna Tell Drama UK woman telling my sinister desires. They're not sinister desires, but I and Brian and I know each other. Other people were saying, yes, in our last conversation when I was talking about this with Brian, yes, Brian was shuffling uncomfortably in his seat whilst you said these terrible things about race. No,
I had a horrible crick in my shoulder,
Yes.
which is absolutely true and nothing to do with the conversation. And I have no idea why.
I've not seen it, so I can't say.
but I'm not backing down on the concept of pride in, if necessary, ethnic identity. I don't feel remotely. And one of the other things, I'm going to read the 14 words now, if I can find them.
Oh, this you really just want to get this video.
Okay, I mean, I'll read them because and another one of the things you said to me, Luke. I mean, as I've become, and I'm quoting you, alt-right-esque in my vernacular. The reason why I've become alt-right-esque in my vernacular is that when I read and research things, I tweet them out. So if I'm into race realism, that's what I'm researching, then that's what I'm going to be tweeting out. But the 14 words are: we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. Now, when I tweeted this out, various people of a certain ethnicity, which you share, Luke.
I didn't even see that tweet, to be honest.
Yeah, when
was that?
Well, this was ages ago.
Right.
But the basic thing is, this is racist because the person that made it up is racist. Now, and I said, don't be so disingenuous. And I suppose this is my view on the alt-right, and this is where we disagree. The alt-right have some ideas on ethnicity that I agree with. They have other ideas on the way to solve the problems that the mixing of different ethnicities create, that I completely disagree with. So you have to separate the message from the messenger. The fact that the guy that made those 14 words up was a disgusting fascist is irrelevant. There's nothing there's remotely unreasonable about these 14 words. And I've had arguments prior to yours with various black friends, and yes, I will ethnoize the thing, because when you tweet these things out, perhaps lots of my white friends might have thought, "Oh, fuck Simon, what are you going on about now?" But they haven't responded. Whereas prior to you, to black people who I share a lot of this SJW anti-Islam opinions with, have reacted rather nefariously, for want of a better word, for some of the things that I've tweeted out. And I don't think I've tweeted out anything insulting.
Okay, yeah, look, I agree with the 14 words only makes me nervous because of the people who generally obsess over it. And like you say, and the person who came up with it, more than the statement in and of itself.
Yeah,
and I'm happy if people understand an identity and find an identity that is theirs, because I think what I do want to get away from, which I think you guys started off discussing this, maybe it's a good way to wrap it round, is this globalist idea that we're all going to live in a John Lennon, imagine there's no borders, imagine there's no... I mean, Imagine, the song, is evil to my mind. It's horrific. Imagine there's no religion, no God above us, no heaven above us, no earth below us. No, actually, I don't want that. I think all of the advances we've made have come from some of these things, and we need nation states. We need to organize ourselves out. You know, we have families, we have bigger extended families, and then we have nations, and I think that the advancement of Western civilization has been tremendous. And we throw that all away if we try and go for a globalist, no borders, collectivist system. It's horrific. So
But the threat to that, though, it isn't racial or race-based, it's values-based,
in my
i.e.
opinion.
the far left.
That too,
it's
but,
the far left.
But I think that there is a racial component to it, and in-group preference is real. And I think a lot of people, you know, I wanted to be with Jews. Now, I don't like all the Jews I'm with, that's for sure. You know, I've got legal disputes with Jews, and that's part and parcel of being. But I think that Europe went too far. The European superstate went far too far, and the UN trying to get its claws into America, trying to take away their guns, which is what the UN's trying to do. The UN is a de-armament. It's on a mission to de-armament. In fact, I know I said I wanted to stop this, but I'll just tell one tiny little story.
I want to say one more thing before we go out.
And then we'll let Simon say one more thing. I came to a startling conclusion when I found myself having lunch with the woman who was running the NRA, the National Rifle Association. And she had explained that the NRA is a human rights organization and that they are campaigning for the human right to self-defense, which is one of the most important rights that you can have. You've got to be able to defend yourself. And suddenly in my head, it flipped over and I started understanding right-wing Americans. And this is, 12, 15 years ago. Because up to then, I was a British person. I just didn't understand why they wanted all these guns. As soon as she put it that way, and as soon as I started to understand the UN as this globalist plot dominated by 56 Islamic states plus one, I started to connect all of this stuff, and the globalists taking away guns, Hitler took away guns. I started to understand conservative America, and their fears are real, some of them. The new alt-right thing takes the race bit, adds it in, and I don't like that bit. But all the rest of it, and what Trump's come along and done in America, I like. And I think Europe needs something similar. And it needs to discover each nation. The Germans need to be German. The French need to be French. I'm not sure about the Spanish, you see, because now I'm all confused about Spain because it's a mismatch. I think we'll throw it to Simon now.
Are they tainted, are they?
No, they're not tainted. It's just
that
what I thought was Spain is not really
because
a coherent identity.
Catalonian Basque. Okay, I'll say my closing comments and then leave Luke to close off. I think ethnicity and a recognition of racial differences, I think it's actually the future. Honest discussions about this and accepting, the reason why certain people run faster, why the fact that there are IQ differences, the fact that these can't necessarily be evened out by culture or education means that you can make a society that is actually more reasonable and has better goals and objectives. If you're honest about the science and not suggesting that this means better or worse, just different. Because the whole buzzword is when the moment you say IQ, everybody assumes, yeah, you can run faster, you can play basketball better, but the moment you say IQ, oh, you're being racist. There are differences between different peoples, and if you don't have honest conversations about what those differences are and what average expectations, and that doesn't mean that individuals can't supersede those expectations, but if you're not honest about the differences between ethnicities, then we're going down a very very difficult path, and it's the path that we've been going on for the last 50 or 60 years. And simply because I'm not politically correct, I'm prepared to have that conversation and take the flak for it if necessary. That doesn't mean that I think I'm better or worse, but I do stand up for my people, and that's it basically. Go on, Luke.
Okay. So I just want to clarify, I at no point have called you a racist. I don't think you're a racist. I didn't say that you're alt-right. I don't think you're alt-right. My initial response, I suppose, was in reaction to what I'm seeing is people not addressing the obvious flaws and the obviously bad principles of the alt-right. So I suppose I'll end with just reminding people what is at the core of the alt-right ideology in terms of their principles. So they are a racial identitarian and collectivist movement, if you want. They have race-based discrimination and segregation as a core principle. They are anti-meritocracy. They are anti-freedom in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of association. And they are massively authoritarian. I'll just give a quick example of their authoritarianism. This evening, I had a little exchange on Twitter with Millennial Woes, and he pretty much outright stated that he wants white women to sleep and procreate with who he sees fit. I said, I'm happy for every individual to make their own personal choices as to who they have relationships with and who they have babies with. I says, I support that and you are against it. And in essence, that is the difference between principles, the principles of liberalism and the alt-right principles. They are authoritarian. They want to dictate who you sleep with, how many babies you have, gay, being gay or not, etc. And I'm open and happy for individuals to make individual choices. And that's it.
All right. We'll talk about white genocide next time.
Yes, next time to be continued.
Thank you all, and thanks for watching, everybody. And I'm very glad we sort of got this going. And I think offline I'll probably have a coaching session with Simon so he can run this on his own channel. And I've got to say,
yes, well done, Brian.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'm not great at these things.
All right.
Not everybody. And
another glass of whiskey needed. And see you all soon.
I'm down to the bar to have a coffee with Brandy now.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye.